A team of brilliant doctors who had pronounced a final fatal verdict. A husband who held on to nothing but his relentless prayer. And a brain tumor that vanished overnight, leaving an impossible miracle in its place. If you believe that faith can still move mountains or even tumors, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. The story you are about to hear is proof that the age of miracles is not over. The auditorium at the prestigious Northwood Medical Institute was a cathedral of science. Glass, steel, and muted grey tones created an atmosphere of cold, intellectual precision. On the massive screen at the front of the room, two images were displayed side by side. The first, labeled "Yesterday," showed a brain scan with a dark, aggressive mass, a glioblastoma, coiled around the brainstem like a serpent. It was an inoperable, unforgiving death sentence. The second image, labeled "This Morning," was shockingly, impossibly clear. The mass was gone, not reduced, not shrunken. Vanished. At the podium stood Dr. Alastair Finch, the Institute's director. He was a man with silver hair, a suit as sharp as a scalpel, and a belief in data that was absolute. He addressed the assembled audience of 100 top oncologists, surgeons, and medical researchers. "Good morning," Dr. Finch began, his voice devoid of warmth. "We are here to discuss an anomaly, an unprecedented event that, for the moment, defies logical explanation. As you can see, the stage 4 tumor in patient Hannah Croft appears to have disappeared." He let the word hang in the air, tasting it with disdain. "Our equipment has been checked, rechecked, and triple-checked. There are no machine errors. The scans are accurate, yet what they show is, by all known medical science, impossible." His gaze then shifted to the man sitting alone in the front row. Samuel Croft, Hannah's husband. He was a carpenter, a man of sawdust and sunlight, and he looked profoundly out of place in this sterile environment. He wore a simple plaid shirt and work pants. His hands, resting on his knees, were those of a man who builds things, not analyzes them. "Mr. Croft," Dr. Finch continued, a patronizing edge to his voice, "has offered an explanation for this. He attributes this event not to a spontaneous remission of statistically astronomical odds or an unknown biological factor, but to prayer." A quiet, derisive murmur rippled through the audience of scientists. It was the sound of 100 logical minds rejecting a variable that did not fit their formulas. "We, as an institution of science," Finch declared, "do not deal in superstition. We deal in provable, repeatable facts. Therefore, this public review has one purpose: to find the rational cause for this event. We invited Mr. Croft here today to assist us. He believes he witnessed a miracle. I believe he witnessed a yet-to-be-explained natural phenomenon, or perhaps a very clever deception." He locked eyes with Samuel, his voice becoming a direct public challenge. "So, Mr. Croft, the floor is yours. Explain it to us. Walk this room of neuro-oncologists through the biological process that caused a terminal glioblastoma to simply dissolve in less than 12 hours. But do so without resorting to words like faith or miracle. Give us the science, sir. Because if you cannot, then we must conclude that we are dealing with either a massive fraud or a shared delusion." It was a perfectly crafted trap. He was asking a carpenter to lecture the world's best doctors on their own subject, while forbidding him from using the only truth he knew. The entire room looked at Samuel, expecting him to falter, to become angry, or to shrink under the weight of their collective skepticism. But Samuel Croft did none of those things. He met the doctor's cold, challenging gaze. He looked at the faces of the scientists who had already judged him. And then he gave a slow, deliberate nod. What Dr. Finch and his room of experts couldn't possibly know was that this was not the first time Samuel had faced a diagnosis of certain death. And his confidence was not built on a wish for a miracle, but on the unshakable memory of a promise God had already kept. But who was this man who could sit so calmly in a den of skeptics, armed with nothing but a quiet certainty? Before he was the husband of a medical miracle, he was just Samuel. Samuel Croft's life was carved from wood and faith. His small carpentry workshop, located behind his modest home, was his sanctuary. It smelled of pine, cedar, and the sweet scent of sawdust. He was a craftsman of the old school, a man who believed that a thing worth making was worth making well. His hands, strong and calloused, could take a rough piece of timber and turn it into something beautiful and lasting, a rocking chair, a cradle, a kitchen table. He was known in his community as a man of his word, quiet, dependable, and deeply honest. His faith was like the grain in the wood he worked with, not something he added on, but an integral part of his very being. It was present in the way he treated his customers, in the grace he said before every meal, and in the small, hand-carved cross he kept in his pocket. His days began long before the sun rose in the quiet of his workshop. He would sit on a stool surrounded by the sleeping tools of his trade and read from a well-worn Bible, its pages soft and frayed at the edges. This was the foundation of his day, the blueprint from which everything else was built. His relationship with God was not one of loud hallelujahs, but of a steady conversational companionship. He and his wife, Hannah, shared a love that was as solid and reliable as the furniture he built. She was a painter, an artist whose vibrant canvases filled their home with color and light, a perfect complement to his earthy, grounded nature. When she had received the devastating diagnosis 6 months prior, their world had tilted on its axis. The doctors at the Northwood Institute, with all their advanced technology and brilliant minds, had spoken of treatments that could manage and extend, but they never spoke of a cure. Samuel had listened to them, his heart aching, but a deeper part of him refused to accept their verdict as final. He had accompanied Hannah to every appointment, held her hand through every grueling radiation session, and at night, when the fear was a cold presence in their room, he would pray. Not with frantic pleas, but with the steady, focused work of a craftsman building a wall of prayer around his wife. The invitation to the Institute's public review had felt less like an inquiry and more like an interrogation. Dr. Finch, upon seeing Hannah's new, clean scans that morning, had immediately treated the event not as a blessing, but as a problem to be solved, an anomaly that threatened the orderly world of his science. His first call to Samuel was filled with pointed, suspicious questions. "Mr. Croft, was your wife involved in any unapproved alternative therapies? Did she take any substances you failed to disclose to us?" Samuel had simply answered, "Doctor, my wife and I followed all of your instructions, but we also followed instructions from a higher authority." It was this statement that had triggered Dr. Finch's decision to hold the public review. He saw in Samuel a challenge to his entire belief system, a threat that needed to be scientifically and publicly dismantled. He saw a simple man whose faith was a dangerous illusion. What he couldn't see was that Samuel's faith was not an illusion at all. It was the most real thing in his life, a certainty that had been tested and proven true in the face of another, impossible diagnosis in a sterile hospital room many years before. What Dr. Finch, with all his accolades and scientific degrees, could never comprehend was that Samuel's calm was not born of ignorance or delusion. It was born of experience. He had sat in a room just like this one before, listening to a man in a white coat deliver a death sentence. His faith was not a theory. It was a scar, a beautiful healed wound that served as a permanent reminder of a past miracle. The memory pulled him back 20 years, to a time when his hands were less calloused and his faith was more of a hopeful blueprint than a finished structure. He was a young man just starting his carpentry business, full of dreams and the quiet ambition of a craftsman. His world revolved around his father, a man named Joseph. Joseph was a carpenter too, the man who had put the first hammer and chisel in Samuel's hands. He was a man of quiet strength, deep integrity, and a simple, rock-solid faith. He taught Samuel not only how to read the grain of a piece of wood, but how to read the heart of a person, and how to trust in the unseen hand of a loving God. Joseph was more than a father. He was Samuel's hero, the bedrock of his world. The trouble began, subtly, a nagging cough that wouldn't go away, a weariness that seemed to settle deep in his bones. Joseph, a man who had never been sick a day in his life, dismissed it as just getting older. But Samuel saw the flicker of pain in his father's eyes, the way he would pause to catch his breath after lifting a heavy piece of lumber. He convinced him to see a doctor. The diagnosis that came back was a brutal, blindsiding blow, late-stage lung cancer. It had already metastasized, spreading like a dark weed through his body. The doctor, a kind but brutally honest oncologist, sat them down in his small, cluttered office. He spread the X-rays across a light-up board, the shadowy masses looking like alien invaders in the landscape of his father's lungs. "I'm so sorry," the doctor had said, his words a clinical death knell. "At this stage, with this level of spread, there is nothing we can do. Chemotherapy would only diminish the quality of the little time he has left. I'd estimate he has 3 months, maybe 4. My best advice is to get his affairs in order and make him comfortable." 3 months! The words echoed in the sterile room. Samuel felt the floor drop out from under him. He looked at his father, expecting to see fear or despair. But Joseph just looked at the X-rays with a strange, calm curiosity, as if studying a particularly complex piece of wood grain. He thanked the doctor politely, and they walked out into the glaring sunlight, the world now seeming unreal and fragile. The months that followed were a slow, agonizing descent. Samuel watched his hero, the strong man who could build a house with. His own 2 hands shrink and weaken. The cough worsened. The pain became a constant, unwelcome guest. Samuel took over the workshop completely, working long hours to keep the business afloat, then coming home to care for his father. His own faith, which had always seemed so strong when tethered to his father's, began to fray. He prayed, but his prayers felt like throwing stones into a vast, empty canyon. "God, please, heal him, don't take him from me, I'll do anything." But the silence that answered was deafening, and every day his father got a little weaker. The bitterness started to creep in, a cold poison in his heart. Where was the God his father had taught him to trust, the God of miracles he had read about in the Bible? It all seemed like beautiful, empty stories in the face of the stark, ugly reality of cancer. His prayers became tinged with anger and doubt. The end came faster than even the doctor had predicted. Just 2 months after the diagnosis, Joseph was admitted to the hospital. The cancer had won. He was too weak to even speak, his breathing a shallow, ragged struggle. The hospital room was a bleak, beige box, filled with the sterile smell of antiseptic and the quiet, rhythmic beeping of machines that were only measuring the slow retreat of life. Samuel sat by his father's bedside for days, a silent, helpless witness. He watched the numbers on the monitors dwindle. He watched the nurses come in with sad, compassionate eyes, offering words of comfort that felt like sandpaper on his raw nerves. He felt a profound, soul-crushing guilt. He had failed. His prayers had failed. His faith had failed. His God had abandoned them. On the 3rd night, the attending physician, a young resident, came into the room. He checked the charts, looked at the monitors, and then put a gentle hand on Samuel's shoulder. "His systems are shutting down," the doctor said softly. "His breathing is becoming too shallow. He won't make it through the night. I'm so sorry, son. It's time to say goodbye." The finality of those words broke something in Samuel. The anger, the grief, the guilt, it all coalesced into a single point of agonizing despair. He asked everyone to leave the room, wanting to be alone with his father for the last time. The door clicked shut, leaving him in the dim light of the hospital room, with only the soft beeping of the machines and the sound of his own heart breaking. He looked at his father, this shell of the great man he had been, and the bitterness overflowed. He didn't kneel. He didn't bow his head. He stood over the bed and spoke to the ceiling, his voice a hoarse, accusatory whisper. "So this is it?" he said to the empty air. "This is your grand plan. You let a good man, a man who served you his whole life, just waste away and die like this? Where were you? Where are all the miracles I heard about? Are they just fairy tales for children?" He was shaking with a rage born of a deep, betrayed love. "You know what? I'm done. I'm done with you. You're not real. Or if you are, you're cruel and you're not worthy of the faith he put in you." He sank into the visitor's chair, utterly defeated, the fight gone out of him. He felt hollowed out, an empty vessel. He just sat there, waiting for the inevitable, listening to the slow, fading rhythm of the machines. And in that moment of complete and total surrender to his own disbelief, something happened. He wasn't looking for it. He wasn't asking for it. But a memory surfaced unbidden. It was a memory of him as a small boy, maybe 6 or 7 years old, in the workshop with his father. He had been trying to build a small wooden boat, but he had messed up the cut, ruining the piece of wood. He had thrown it on the floor in frustration, ready to give up. His father had picked up the ruined piece. "Ah," Joseph had said, his voice calm and gentle. "Look here, son, you see a mistake. But a master carpenter, he sees an opportunity. The wood isn't ruined. Its purpose has just changed." And he had taken the ruined piece and, with a few skillful cuts, had carved it into a beautiful small bird. "Never forget, Samuel," his father had told him, handing him the bird. "The master carpenter never makes mistakes, and he never ever throws away a piece of wood. He just finds a new, more beautiful purpose for it." The memory was so vivid, so real, that Samuel could almost smell the sawdust and feel the smooth carved bird in his hand. And with that memory came a wave of shame so profound it brought him to his knees. What was he doing? He was giving up on his father. He was giving up on his father's God. He had been so focused on his own pain, on his own definition of a win, that he had forgotten the most important lesson his father had ever taught him. He knelt by the bedside, his forehead resting on the cool metal rail, and for the first time he prayed a real prayer. It wasn't a bargain, it wasn't a demand, it was a cry of pure, desperate, and finally, humble faith. "God," he whispered, the tears he had been holding back for months finally breaking. "Free. I'm so sorry, I am so sorry. I doubted you, I cursed you, I have been so blind. Forgive me." He took his father's hand, his own hand feeling so much like his father's had felt all those years ago. "He is yours, Joseph. He has always been yours. You gave him to me for a time, and I am so grateful. If this is his time to come home, to your workshop, then I accept it. I surrender, your will be done. Thank you for the gift of his life." He paused, the tears streaming down his face. "But Father, if there is still a purpose for him here, if there is still work for him to do, if you could just show your mercy, I make you this vow, I will never doubt you again. I will spend the rest of my life telling people what you did in this room tonight. I will live a life that honors this moment. Please, Lord, just one more lesson from the master carpenter." He stayed there kneeling, his heart laid bare, expecting nothing. The beeping of the machines continued its slow, steady decline, but as he prayed, a deep, unexplainable peace settled over him, the same peace he now felt sitting in this auditorium. It was the peace that comes after the storm, the peace of total surrender. And then the rhythm of the beeping changed. It didn't jump, it didn't spike, it just stopped declining. And then, slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, it began to climb. Beep, beep, a little stronger. Beep, beep, a little steadier. Samuel lifted his head, his heart pounding. He looked at the monitor. The numbers that had been dropping were now holding steady, and then they began to rise. At the same moment, he felt a faint pressure on his hand. He looked down. His father's fingers, which had been limp and lifeless, had tightened around his. Joseph's eyes fluttered open. He looked at Samuel, and a faint, weak but unmistakable smile touched his lips. He tried to speak, his voice a dry, raspy whisper. "The bird," he managed to say. "Never. Throw it away." The doctors and nurses who rushed in moments later had no explanation. They called it an unexplained stabilization. They used phrases like remarkable turnaround, but Samuel knew what it was. It was a promise answered. Joseph lived for another 2 years, 2 years of remission that the doctors called a medical miracle. They were 2 years of grace, 2 years where father and son worked side by side in the workshop, not just building with wood, but rebuilding a faith that was now stronger than any earthly material. It was this memory, this absolute, proven knowledge of a God who answers, that now armed Samuel against the cold skepticism of Dr. Finch and his entire institute. And it was the memory of that sacred moment, the gentle pressure of his father's hand, the impossible reversal of the numbers on the screen, that now served as Samuel's unbreakable shield. Back in the present, under the harsh lights of the Medical Institute, the time for quiet remembrance was over. The time for a quiet declaration had begun. The air in the auditorium was thick with a smug, expectant silence. Dr. Finch and his colleagues saw Samuel's quiet reflection as a sign of weakness, a retreat into the fantasy they were so determined to expose. They were waiting for him to stammer, to offer a flimsy emotional plea that they could easily dissect with their sharp, logical minds. Dr. Finch leaned into the microphone, his voice dripping with condescension. "Mr. Croft, we are waiting. You have the stage. Please enlighten us with your scientific explanation for this event. Or shall we conclude this review and proceed with our own investigation into this anomaly, an investigation that will, I assure you, be thorough?" The threat was clear. They would find a rational explanation, even if they had to invent one, and in doing so they would brand him a fool or a fraud. One of the senior researchers in the front row chimed in, unable to resist a jab. "Perhaps Mr. Croft believes in a new kind of cellular biology, one governed by wishful thinking? I would love to see that research paper." A few chuckles rippled through the audience. They were like a pack of wolves, sensing they had their prey, cornered, ready to move in for the final decisive strike. But Samuel was not prey, and he was not cornered. The memory of his father's miracle had filled him not with arrogance, but with an unshakable, profound calm. He stood up slowly, and the simple physical act silenced the room. The quiet carpenter, who had seemed so out of place moments before, now commanded the space with an authority that had nothing to do with degrees or titles. He looked directly at Dr. Finch, his gaze steady and clear. "You are right, Doctor," Samuel began, his voice even and strong, resonating through the silent auditorium. "I cannot give you a scientific explanation. That is your field, not mine. I am a carpenter. I work with wood. But I know this. Every piece of wood, every tree, every cell in the human body was created by the same hand, and the Maker always knows more than the men who study his creation." He walked from his seat toward the stage, not with hesitation, but with the steady, purposeful stride of a man on a mission. "You ask for facts, for evidence. You want something you can measure and quantify. You want to look at this through your microscopes and your scanners, hoping to find a loose wire or a faulty pixel that explains away what you cannot comprehend." He stopped at the edge of the stage, his eyes sweeping over the faces of the scientists. "But you are looking in the wrong place. The evidence of what happened to my wife is not in the scans from this morning." He paused, letting the statement sink in. "The evidence is in the scan from yesterday." Dr. Finch's brow furrowed in confusion. "What are you talking about, Mr. Croft?" "The scan from yesterday shows a terminal, inoperable tumor. That is the very problem we are trying to explain." "Exactly," Samuel said, his voice ringing with a powerful certainty. "You see it as a problem. I see it as the before picture. You are so focused on the after that you have forgotten the impossibility of the before. You want proof of a miracle. The proof is not the clean scan. The proof is the dirty one. The proof is the very image you yourselves labeled a death sentence." He then did something that completely shifted the dynamic of the room. He made a specific technical request that no one expected from a simple carpenter. "Doctor, on that scan from yesterday," he said, pointing to the dark, menacing image on the screen, "your team conducted a biopsy. You have a sample of that tumor. Tissue in your pathology lab right now, do you not?" Dr. Finch was taken aback. "Yes, of course, it's standard procedure. The biopsy confirmed the diagnosis." "I am not asking you to re-examine the scans," Samuel said, his voice unwavering. "I am asking you to re-examine the tissue itself. Go to your lab. Put that sample of my wife's tumor, the one you declared to be aggressive and fatal, under your most powerful electron microscope. I want you to project what you see on that screen. Live, for all of us." The room was stunned into silence. This was not a vague appeal to faith. It was a direct scientific challenge. He was pointing them to their own evidence, their own sample, and telling them to look closer. What could he possibly think they would find? The tissue was dead. It was a sample of a tumor. What could it possibly show? Dr. Finch stared at him, a whirlwind of doubt and a new unwelcome flicker of curiosity warring in his mind. The request was absurd, but it was also brilliant. If he refused, he would look like he was afraid of his own evidence. With a sigh of pure exasperation, He nodded to his assistant. "Do it," he commanded, his voice tight. "Get Dr. Evans in pathology on the line and tell him I want a live feed from his main microscope. Let's see what kind of rabbit Mr. Croft thinks he's going to pull out of this hat." The silence in the auditorium was now absolute. The air of smug certainty had evaporated, replaced by a tense, palpable curiosity. Samuel's challenge had been so unexpected, so specific, that it had disarmed them all. He wasn't debating their science. He was inviting them to use it, to push it to its very limits. Within minutes, a new image flickered onto the massive screen. It was a live feed from the Northwood Institute's state-of-the-art pathology lab, a room of gleaming chrome and powerful lenses. The audience could see the hands of Dr. Evans, the head pathologist, as he carefully prepared a slide. This slide contained a sliver of tissue, a sample taken just the day before from the heart of Hannah Croft's tumor. It was a microscopic snapshot of death, a sample of the very cells that were supposed to be ending her life. "Dr. Finch, are you sure about this?" Dr. Evans's voice, slightly distorted through the lab's intercom system, filled the auditorium. "This is the confirmed glioblastoma tissue. We've already run the full analysis. There's nothing new to see here. Just do it, Evans," Dr. Finch commanded, his voice tight with irritation. "Put it under the electron microscope, maximum magnification, project the primary display." On the screen, the image shifted. The audience was now looking at a view magnified hundreds of thousands of times. They saw a chaotic landscape of malformed, cancerous cells. They were exactly as the textbooks described, misshapen, disorganized, their nuclei dark and grotesque. It was the image of aggressive, uncontrolled division, the very essence of cancer. A wave of relief and vindication washed over Dr. Finch. He pointed to the screen with a triumphant flourish. "There you have it, Mr. Croft. As you can see, these are undeniably malignant cells. Aggressive, unstable, exactly as we diagnosed. This proves nothing, except that your wife had a very real, very deadly tumor yesterday. Is this the evidence you wanted us all to see?" He was ready to dismiss the feed, to end the charade. But Samuel remained perfectly calm. He hadn't even looked at the screen. His eyes were closed, as if in a quiet, focused prayer. "Just wait, Doctor," Samuel said softly, his voice full of a strange, patient confidence. "Keep watching." Dr. Evans in the lab sighed with audible frustration but obeyed. He kept the microscope focused on the field of cancerous cells. For a long, silent minute, nothing changed. The image was a static portrait of disease. The scientists in the audience began to shift in their seats, their brief curiosity turning back into boredom. And then it happened. It started in a single cell, in the corner of the screen. A flicker, a pulse of soft white light from within the dark, malformed nucleus. Dr. Evans, peering into his eyepiece, blinked. "What in the world?" he muttered. He thought it was an artifact, a power surge in the microscope's illumination system, but then another cell pulsed, and another. Across the entire field of view, the dead, cancerous tissue was coming to life. But it wasn't the chaotic, malignant life of a tumor. This was something else entirely. From the heart of each diseased cell, a brilliant white light began to emanate. The light was not burning the cells. It was, remaking them. The audience gasped. Dr. Finch took a step closer to the screen, his mouth falling open. They were witnessing a biological event that had never been documented in the history of medicine. Live on the screen, magnified for all to see, the misshapen cells began to change. As the light within them grew brighter, their chaotic structures started to realign. The grotesque, oversized nuclei shrank and reformed. The jagged cell walls softened and became smooth and uniform. The disorganized clusters began to arrange themselves into the neat, orderly patterns of healthy brain tissue. It was not destruction, it was restoration. It was a process of uncreation and recreation, happening at a cellular level. The room was in an uproar of hushed, frantic whispers. "This is impossible. What is that light source? It's rewriting the cellular structure. This defies everything we know about biology." Dr. Evans's voice crackled over the intercom again, now filled with pure, unadulterated awe. I don't understand," he stammered. "The cellular matrix, it's reorganizing. The DNA is..." It's repairing itself. This isn't just cell death. This is regeneration. It's like watching a film of a flower blooming, but in reverse and forward at the same time. Within the span of 2 minutes, the entire sample of tissue on the slide had transformed. The chaotic, cancerous landscape was gone. In its place was a perfect, beautiful, orderly arrangement of healthy glial cells. The before picture had become the after picture right before their eyes. The proof of the miracle wasn't that the tumor was gone. The proof was in how it had gone. It hadn't been killed. It had been redeemed. Samuel finally opened his eyes and looked at the screen, a quiet, knowing smile on his face. He then turned to Dr. Alastair Finch. The great doctor was pale, leaning on the podium for support, as if his legs could no longer hold him. He stared at the screen, then at Samuel, his mind, a fortress of logic and reason, utterly breached. The anomaly wasn't in the scans. The anomaly was in the very fabric of life and death itself. He had demanded a scientific explanation, and in a way, he had gotten one. He had just witnessed the science of creation, a force so profound and so powerful that it made all of his own knowledge seem like the scribbles of a child. But as the impossible image of renewed life glowed on the screen, and while every scientist in the room was grappling with the collapse of their known universe, Samuel Croft did not celebrate. He did not point a finger or claim his victory. He simply stood in the quiet eye of the storm he had created. The room was a vacuum of shock. For long minutes, no one spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the auditorium's ventilation system. The faces of these brilliant men and women were a gallery of disbelief. They had just witnessed a fundamental law of nature, that cancer is a chaotic, destructive force, be completely and utterly rewritten. They had looked for a trick, and had found a truth so overwhelming it left no room for argument. Eventually, all eyes turned from the screen to Samuel. He was no longer just a carpenter in a room of doctors. He was an envoy from a world they had never known existed. They looked at him, waiting for him to explain, to claim his power, to tell them what it all meant. It was Dr. Finch who finally broke the silence. He pushed himself away from the podium, his movements stiff, as if he was suddenly a very old man. He walked toward Samuel. His eyes, which had once been so full of certainty and skepticism, were now wide with a raw, terrifying wonder. "What have you done?" Finch whispered, his voice barely audible. It wasn't an accusation anymore. It was a genuine question, the plea of a man whose map had just been consumed by fire. Samuel looked at him with a deep and abiding compassion. "It is not what I have done, Doctor," he said, his voice calm and gentle, yet filling the entire auditorium. "It is what I was allowed to witness, just like all of you." He turned to address the entire room, his gaze moving from one stunned face to the next. "You are men and women of science. You dedicate your lives to finding answers, to understanding the intricate machinery of life, and that is a noble and worthy calling. But you have been studying the machine for so long you have forgotten to ask about the machinist." He gestured to the screen, where the image of the healthy, vibrant cells still glowed. "You wanted evidence you could see. You wanted proof you could measure. God in His grace has given you that today. He has allowed you to peer through your most powerful lens and see His hand at work at the most fundamental level of His creation." "You call this an anomaly?" Samuel continued, his voice resonating with a simple, profound truth. "But in the kingdom of God, this is not an anomaly. This is how it works. His power is not to destroy, but to restore, not to kill, but to make do. You saw not just a healing, but a recreation. That is the very nature of the one you have been trying so hard to disprove." He looked directly at Dr. Finch, his eyes kind. "You challenged me to explain this without using words like faith or miracle, but that is an impossible task. It would be like asking a man to describe the sun without using the words light or warmth. The miracle is not separate from the science. It is the science that lies beyond your current understanding." He asked for nothing. He demanded no apology for the public challenge, no retraction of their skeptical accusations. The proof on the screen was so absolute, so complete, that any words of triumph from him would have only diminished its power. His lesson was simple and devastatingly clear. A man can spend his life studying the creation, but true wisdom only begins when he finally stands in awe of the Creator. Those quiet, powerful words settled upon the room, not as an attack, but as an invitation. They were an invitation to see the world not as a closed system of predictable laws, but as a living canvas, still being painted by an unseen artist. And, for Dr. Alastair Finch, the invitation was one he could no longer refuse. He stood before Samuel, the rigid posture of the Institute director gone, replaced by the stooped shoulders of a student before his teacher. He looked at the screen, then back at Samuel, and the carefully constructed walls of his lifelong skepticism crumbled into dust. For 40 years, Dr. Finch said, his voice thick with an emotion that shocked his colleagues, I have lectured in this very room. I have taught generations of doctors to trust only in what is observable, to dismiss anything that cannot be explained by our current knowledge. I have taught them that faith is a comfort for the patient, but a danger to the physician. He shook his head slowly, a look of deep regret on his face. Today, a carpenter has taught me that the opposite is true. Our knowledge is the comfort. Faith is the reality. He took a deep, shuddering breath, a man unburdened for the first time. Mr. Croft, I have no words to express the magnitude of this moment. I publicly questioned your integrity and your sanity. I used this platform to humiliate you, and in doing so I have only humiliated myself and the very science I claim to champion. On behalf of this entire institution, I offer you our most profound and humble apology. The apology hung in the air, a stunning admission from a man who had never admitted to being wrong about anything. And now, Dr. Finch continued, a new, desperate energy in his voice. I must ask you, what do we do now? This changes everything. Our research, our methods, our very philosophy of medicine. We need your guidance. I will authorize a new department, a new field of study based on what we saw today. We will call it whatever you wish. We will fund it with millions. We will make you its director. Please, just show us the way. It was a staggering offer, a complete surrender. The keys to the kingdom of science were being handed to a carpenter. The audience watched, breathless, to see what he would do. Samuel listened patiently, a kind smile on his face. When Dr. Finch was finished, he gently shook his head. Doctor, you don't need a new department, Samuel said softly. You just need a new perspective. You don't need me as a director. The director has already shown you the way. He gestured once more to the screen. Your work from this day forward is the same as it was yesterday, to heal the sick. But now you know you are not doing it alone. When you hold a scalpel, know that a greater hand guides yours. When you read a scan, ask for the wisdom to see what truly matters. Treat the body, but remember you are also treating a soul, he began, to walk away from the stage back towards the exit. My work is in my workshop, he said. My place is beside my wife. Your place is here, to take this incredible gift you have been given and use it to bring not just healing, but also hope to the people who walk through your doors. Dr. Finch watched him go, not attempting to stop him. He understood. The miracle was not a new discovery to be patented and monetized. It was a revelation to be lived. As Samuel walked down the aisle, the men and women of science stood up one by one, not in a formal ovation, but in a spontaneous, silent gesture of profound respect for the humble carpenter who had just reopened the frontiers of their world. Samuel Croft left the Northwood Medical Institute that day and returned to his simple, quiet life. He sought no fame, gave no interviews, and never spoke of the event again, except in quiet prayers of thanks. His reward was not the recognition of the world, but the sound of his wife Hannah's laughter filling their home, a sound more precious than any scientific discovery. She lived a long, healthy, and vibrant life, a walking, breathing testament to a miracle that defied all explanation. The Institute was never the same. The Croft event, as it became known in quiet whispers, was never officially published, but it changed the heart of the institution. It infused the cold halls of science with a new and profound sense of wonder, reminding a generation of doctors that the ultimate source of healing lies not in a textbook, but in the hands of the Creator. If this story of a husband's steadfast prayer and God's incredible power to restore has touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Here, we share powerful reminders that when we face the impossible, faith is the only science that truly matters.